So a few months ago I whipped up this bag very quickly and in a very rogue manner, and I've been waiting to find another material that I would like to remake it out of, and then also adjust maybe some of the finishing details and the process. And today is that day where I show you how we recreate it. The overall look is a nice chunky strap with this little tie feature. Obviously that is optional, you don't have to do that. I'll explain where you can change that. And a very just like loose style bag. Today we're not going to focus on adding a zip, it's just going to be an easy open access. Play around with pop of color and make it a feature piece of your outfit, or like the one that I'm going to be recreating, it is out of this brown wool, so a bit more neutral. So you're more than welcome to just watch along and see it come to life. Otherwise, if you want to make your own, this is what you'll need. So for this project, obviously we will need some material. You want something nice and sturdy for the outside. For both of these, I ended up going for a wool just because I preferred the texture. Some other suggestions could be like a denim, even like a corduroy, a thick like cotton or linen. If anything, I'd just try and avoid flimsy or lightweight material, as this will need to be quite a sturdy structure. So anything that is thick or strong enough to be tugged on and able to handle the weight of whatever you put in your bag. Then for this particular bag, we will be using a lining as well. And I've gone for quite a sturdy cotton material. It could just be a general poplin woven material, or even anything that does have a bit more of a sheer finish, as it is just mainly there to help create a lining that we can add pockets to and just to hide any of the raw seams as well. For the recommended amount, I will put that in the description box of this video. As you can see, it's not a very big project. Roughly it will end up being less than a meter for the lining and the external material. And then once you've got your material, we'll just need the essentials like pins, fabric chalk, fabric scissors, measuring tape, some thread to match your material, and of course our trusty old sewing machine. Now that we've got all that, it is time to jump into our DIY. But one moment just before we do that, I want to say a massive thank you to the sponsor of today's video, which is Scent Australia. I've personally been using their smart diffuser around my home, and I love the fact that I can just set and forget the intervals when it does release the scent, and it keeps our space just continuously smelling nice. They also offer a heap of different ways to help keep your home smelling beautiful. This can either be through electronic or reed diffusers. And then once you've selected your preferred device, they've got so many different scents, and it's so fun because you can play around with the different themes of your space or even the different seasons. I'm personally very big on keeping our space smelling fresh, and now I can do that with the help of Scent Australia. If you also want to get yourself one of their beautiful products, you can use my discount code, which is in the description of this video. Make sure you jump on that offer while it lasts. A massive thank you to Scent Australia for making this video possible. And now let's jump into making this bag. For step one, we need to cut out all the pieces for the external and also the lining. So to make this nice and easy, I'm just going to pop up a few graphics with the dimensions that you need to measure out and cut. These measurements all include about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter of seam allowance. I just find maybe drawing it out yourself rather than me providing a PDF for you to download then print can just be a bit overwhelming, because we all have different paper sizes. Not everyone has access to printers, so this is my most accessible version. So for the main panels of the front and back of the bag, it'll be 14.5 inches wide by 12 inches high. Once you've mapped that out, then we'll just curve the bottom corners. Now this comes down to personal preference. For my purple bag, I went for more of a rounder finish, pretty much a semicircle around the bottom, and it does decrease the size of the bag and the overall amount of stuff that you can fit in there, but I do feel it gives it more of kind of like a cute designer bag feel. Whereas the brown bag, I did a bit more of a square edge, as I will be using it more as a daily number and I can therefore fit more in there. You're more than welcome to do similar to what I have done in either of these styles, or obviously play around with what you prefer. If you're unsure of how to figure out how to create the curve, just measure in an equal amount from each corner and then curve from each of those points. And you can do that by freehand or by using a piece of string and your pen. So once we have 4 pieces, 2 for the inside and 2 for the outside, cut out from that, we can then focus on the undercarriage area, which, as you can see, this bag is just this panel that gives a bit of separation from the front and back. So the measurements that you see on the screen are going to be half of this. And the reason being, obviously, it is a very long strip, so it's ideal to figure out half of it, and then when you cut it, just cut it on the fold. So it means you just fold the bit of fabric, pop the paper pattern piece on top of that, trim around it, and then once this panel is on its own, you can unfold it and you'll have the full panel. So maybe on your bit of paper pattern, right on the fold on this taller end, and that will help you remember to cut it out in that style. Again, we'll need to cut out one in the lining and then one in the external material. We will start by drawing out a rectangle which is 19 inches long by 4 inches wide, and then we're going to do a bit of a connect the dots style to create the angles to help shape the bag. So on one of the ends we're going to measure in 3/4 of an inch from each of the height edges, pop a dot point there, then we'll measure in 5.5 inches, pop another dot point there, and then from that other end that we haven't measured from yet, we will then measure 4.5 inches in from there. Then you can just draw a line between these 3 dot points, and that will just help us determine the angles. Then for the straps, we are just going to have 2 of the external fabric pieces, which will end up joining together. I personally ended up cutting my straps on the fold, and that ends up being 15 inches long by 2.5 inches wide. And then this one is optional, but if you are like me and like to add pockets, cut out 1 or 2 pieces out of the lining, and then we can tuck this on the inside so we can like put our phones and wallets and little things in there. Again, you can custom size your pockets if you want them to be bigger or smaller, depending on how you would prefer to use them. If you do this, make sure to add at least 1/2 inch or 2 centimeters of seam allowance. I personally went for quite a bigger pocket, so mine ended up being about 10 inches long by 6 inches wide. I would recommend, just as a little reminder when we are cutting out pieces, to put notes like how many of these pieces you need to cut out of the good fabric as well as the lining, and of course adding the on the fold indicator so that we do cut it on the fold. So once we've got all the pieces cut out, we will focus on the outside of the bag first. So lay down one of your main panels, and I'm just going to fold this in half with the good sides facing out so it helps me find the center point. And then going to grab the panel that joins the front and the back, and again fold that so it helps me find the center point, lay it down so the folded edges are meeting so that the good sides are facing, and then we can unfold it, flatten it out, match all the edges, and begin pinning around this area. Once I was happy with the placement of that, I then just jumped on the machine and sewed entirely around this area. That meant one of the front and the side panels was joined, and now it was time to finish it off with the back panel. So just repeat the same process of laying the good edges of the side panel to the good edges of the back panel, flattening it all out so it matches, pinning it in place, and then sewing entirely around here. The suggested length for the side panel is longer to allow for more square edges, so you will find the more you curve the edges, the more overhang you might have, so just trim that off and make sure it is all matching. Then we can begin to prepare the lining. First I'm going to focus on adding the pockets in, and to do that I just zigzag stitched, or you can overlock all of the edges so they're nice and clean. Pick what edge you would like to be the top, and we're going to fold that in by 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter and sew that in place, so it creates a nice clean top edge of the pocket. Then to add this pocket into the lining, lay down the bag panel with the good sides facing up, and then also lay the pocket with the good sides facing up. And for the placement of it, one of the final steps is creating a large fold. So we want to make sure that we're not placing the pocket where it will get hidden when we do this step. So you can place it and just do a double check with the fold, or just make sure that it is at least 4.5 inches from the top. Once you're happy with that, we will then just fold the remaining 2 side edges and bottom edge in and pin this in place. As always, you can do a extra step here and pre-fold it and iron it so the crease stays nice and crisp as you are pinning this in place. And if you have followed my tutorials before, you probably know that I just am lazy about ironing, so I just folded it straight in place and pinned it there. Once you're happy with that, then just sew the one side edge, the bottom edge, and back up the other side edge, leaving that top edge open, because we're obviously creating a pocket. If you're unfamiliar with turning corners, just make sure that you get to about 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimeter from the edge where you're about to turn. Swivel your needle so it is in the fabric, lift your foot up, and then turn your fabric so that it is facing the new direction that you want to sew across. Pop your foot back down, and then just continue sewing as normal. And then you'll just repeat that for the second corner and finish with a back stitch as you would. I personally ended up adding 2 pockets, so 1 pocket on either main panel side, so I then repeated that for the second lining panel, and then it was time to start joining it all up. We essentially just repeat the same steps for the outside, so laying one of the main panels with the good sides facing up, folding it to find the center point, and then again doing that to the side panel, sewing this in place, and then repeating it for the back side as well. So at this point that means we have the lining all finished, looking cute, and we've got the outside all essentially finished. As most of the seams are going to get hidden, you don't really have to worry about overlocking or zigzag stitching it, but I did find that my external material was very fray-y. I know that's not really a word, but it did tend to fray quite a bit, so I did just do the extra preventative measure of zigzag stitching this material just so it doesn't start to unravel on the insides. And we're going to start joining these together. So leave your main fabric good sides facing out, and then we're going to flip the lining so that the bad sides are facing out. And that means when we slip the lining into the main material, that all the seams will get hidden as they'll be facing each other, and all the good sides will be facing out and exposed. We'll just make sure that the seams are all aligning, the top edges are sitting nice and flush, and then we'll just sew one line, securing this in place just so it doesn't move around as we continue sewing. You can just do this with a regular stitch entirely around this top area so that it joins the lining to the main fabric. Next we'll just flip it so that the lining is facing outwards, and we would do one simple folded hem. I'd recommend doing this at about 1 centimeter or half an inch of a fold. You can pin this in place and then just sew entirely around here. While that is sitting to the side, we are then going to start preparing the straps. We're going to lay the two pieces of the straps good side facing and sew down the two long edges with about a 1 centimeter or half an inch seam allowance. I trimmed off any excess material and then went back and zigzag stitched this material. Just as I mentioned earlier, I did find that it was kind of unraveling a little bit, so again, just another preventative measure which you can do if you also would like to. And then just grabbed a safety pin, popped it on one of the raw edges, and began pushing this through the tunnel so that it then pushed the good sides of the material facing outwards on the other end. Now this comes down to personal preference. I do prefer just leaving this strap as is because I like the kind of like bulky free flowing effect, but if you do like a bit more of a structured finish, you can sew some parallel top stitches across either edge, and that will give it a bit more of a flat finish. You will find when it comes to the knot that it is nice just giving it that open flowy effect like I do. Speaking of the knot, it is time to tie that before we start attaching this strap on. It's nothing special, it is just a regular knot. Ideally position about 8 inches off one of the edges just so it leaves enough room so we can attach this strap onto the bag. The good thing about the knot just being a regular tie is that we can adjust where it sits later on. Sometimes I like to move the tie so it's a little bit more at the front, sometimes it's up the top. To begin attaching it, we'll lay the bag so it is good sides facing outwards. And trust me, I know this bit is going to look like it is messy and unfinished, and that's because it is unfinished and we have one final step after this. Lay this strap down as you would like to end up seeing it. So if you have a preferred good side, make sure that is facing outward at this time, and also make sure that you don't add any extra twist because once we sew this in place, that's how it's going to sit. So line the raw edge of the strap so it is about 1 inch or 2 centimeters off the edge, and that we can sew over that existing line that we have created from the hem underneath. Pin this in place, jump on the machine, and then just begin sewing across this strap, and that will help create this first line that is securing it in place. Side note as well, if you do find that your end of your strap is fraying a little bit, it might be good to zigzag stitch or overlock it before doing this step just to prevent it from unraveling later on. So repeat this for both sides. Next we're going to flip the bag so it's inside out and do that larger hem that I was talking about earlier. So we end up folding it over by about 2 inches and moving the strap upwards so it's sitting how a bag normally should, and you'll see by doing that it ends up hiding that raw edge, and then we can end up sewing a final line which adds one more secured line to the strap as well as holding this hem in place. For this final line, I would recommend sewing as close as you can to the edge. For me, that was about 1/2 centimeter or 1/4 of an inch. Also a warning, if you're like me and you are using a thick material, just make sure to go nice and slow over the areas where it is quite layered up, especially at the seams or where the straps are. I just wanted to stop at this point and show you how it ends up looking in case you need a little close up. And then I just continued that line entirely around this whole top area. If you are following along and making this bag, you will notice that this sewing line obviously does not hold down the rest of the larger fold that we have created. So there's two options here. You can either do a second sewing line, which is about 1.5 inches from that top edge, and that will help keep the fold in place. Or if you're like me and you don't want a second line showing, and we're going to begin hand stitching the folded edge onto the lining. So you can grab a hand stitching needle, cut off enough thread so it can go at least double around this top area. Thread this onto the end of the hand stitching needle, tie a knot about 3 inches from the end. Ideally this hand stitching line will be hidden underneath the fold, so make sure as you are going through the lining and the folded edge that it is tucked a little bit under, and that way you won't end up seeing it. So the way that I do this is I start on the lining, push it through the lining, and also loop it under the knot before I pull it entirely through, just to help give it a nice secure start. And then I'll just start weaving through the lining and the folded edge continuously until I make it around the whole top area. So as you can see, it starts off a little bit loose, but as I keep giving it a nice tight pull, it holds this in place. This hand stitching line is obviously not a structural line, it is more just an aesthetic line to keep it down, but the whole bag integrity is not reliant on it, if that makes sense. That's the benefit of having lining, and just a little hack of having that final stitch in place where it holds it there, but then you don't see it from the outside. So once you get back to where you started, I know there are many different ways how you finish it. I just find if you just leave a little tail end on where you started and where you finished, you can then just tie a few knots, tug on it until you feel like it's nice and secure, trim off any excess thread, and that is all nice and hidden and underneath that folded edge. And that, my friends, is your complete bag, if you did follow along. I love my purple bag as a little pop of colour on outfits, and then also my little brown bag as a cute daily. I hope you enjoyed watching this come to life. As always, if you do follow along, don't forget to tag me at the Essentials Club, as I always love seeing your outcomes. And I hope wherever you are, you're having a lovely day, and I will see you guys in the upcoming videos.
You always let me know.